Everyone thought she married a poor black waiter, but he was actually a billionaire CEO. The coffee machine hissed like an angry cat as Elijah King pulled another perfect espresso shot. Steam curled around his face, momentarily hiding the sharp intelligence in his dark eyes, eyes that noticed everything but revealed nothing. At 29, he moved through the velvet note with the quiet grace of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. "Table 7 wants extra foam on their cappuccino," called Marcus, the other waiter, as he rushed past with a tray of pastries. "And the lady at table 3 keeps staring at you again." Elijah glanced toward table 3 without turning his head. Ava Green sat there every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 2:15 p.m., her wild curls catching the afternoon light streaming through the cafe's vintage windows. She sketched in a worn leather notebook, occasionally looking up to study the way shadows played across the exposed brick walls or how the jazz music seemed to make people move differently. Today, like every day for the past 3 months, she watched him work. "She's an artist," Elijah said, wiping down the espresso machine with methodical precision. "Artists observe. Artists also tip better when they're interested." Marcus grinned. "You should ask her out." Elijah said nothing, but his hand stilled for just a moment. He'd been watching Ava too, the way she bit her lip when concentrating, how she always ordered the same lavender latte but never finished it, the small frown that appeared whenever she checked her phone. There was something about her that pulled at him, a recognition he couldn't quite name. The bell above the door chimed, and Elijah's entire body tensed. He didn't need to look to know who had entered. The sharp click of designer heels on hardwood, the subtle shift in the cafe's atmosphere, like a predator entering a peaceful meadow. "Well, well," came a smooth voice dripping with false charm. "If it isn't my dear cousin, playing dress-up." Julian King stood in the doorway like he owned the place, his $1,000 suit a stark contrast to the cafe's comfortable shabbiness. At 31, Julian had inherited their grandfather's ruthless ambition but none of his wisdom. His pale eyes swept the room with calculating precision before settling on Elijah. "Julian!" Elijah's voice remained steady, professional. "What can I get you? How about some honesty?" Julian stepped closer to the counter, his voice low enough that only Elijah could hear. 90 days, cousin?" Tick-tock. The espresso cup in Elijah's hand trembled slightly. 90 days until his 30th birthday. 90 days until his grandfathers will either made him the rightful heir to King Media Corporation, or handed everything to Julian. "I don't know what you're talking about," Elijah said, but Julian's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Of course you don't. You're just a simple waiter, after all." Julian's eyes gleamed. "Though I have to wonder, what would all these lovely people think if they knew the truth about you? About the fortune you walked away from? About the clause in grandfather's will that requires you to be married by your 30th birthday?" The coffee machine hissed again, filling the silence between them. Across the cafe, Ava looked up from her sketch, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. "Leave them out of this," Elijah said quietly. "Them?" Julian followed his gaze to Ava. "Oh, how interesting. Don't tell me the great Elijah King has developed feelings for a starving artist. How common of you." Before Elijah could respond, Julian was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of expensive cologne and the promise of future trouble. "Friend of yours?" Ava's voice was soft, curious. Elijah turned to find her standing at the counter, her notebook clutched against her chest like armor. "Not exactly." He managed a smile, though it felt brittle. "The usual? Actually." She hesitated, tucking a curl behind her ear. "I was wondering if you'd like to get dinner sometime. When you're not working, I mean." For a moment, Elijah forgot how to breathe. 3 months of stolen glances and careful distance, and now she was here, asking him out just as his carefully constructed world threatened to collapse around him. "I'd like that," he said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in years. Her smile was like sunrise, slow, warm, transformative. "I know a place. Nothing fancy, just good food and better conversation." "Sounds perfect." As she walked back to her table, Elijah caught his reflection in the chrome surface of the espresso machine. The man looking back at him wore a simple black apron and had calloused hands from honest work. But behind his eyes lurked the ghost of boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions, of a life he'd abandoned and a legacy that refused to let him go. His phone buzzed. A text from his grandfather's attorney. "We need to talk. Julian's been asking questions." Elijah deleted the message without responding. 90 days. The number echoed in his mind like a countdown to his own execution. 90 days to figure out how to save his inheritance without destroying the life he built. 90 days to decide if love was worth the risk of losing everything. At table 3, Ava was sketching again, but now she drew from memory the curve of his smile, the way his hands moved with quiet confidence, the sadness he tried to hide behind professional politeness. She didn't know she was drawing a man worth billions. She only knew she was drawing someone who made her feel seen. The jazz music swirled around them both, a soundtrack to secrets and possibilities. Outside, Atlanta hummed with its usual energy, unaware that in a small cafe tucked away from the world, two lives were about to collide in ways that would change everything. Elijah returned to his work, pulling shots and steaming milk, playing the part of a simple waiter while his mind raced through increasingly desperate scenarios. Julian's visit wasn't random, it was a warning shot. His cousin knew about the marriage clause, which meant he'd been digging through their grandfather's private papers. If Julian was willing to confront him publicly, even subtly, it meant the game had already begun. The afternoon wore on, customers coming and going in the comfortable rhythm of a neighborhood cafe. But Elijah felt the weight of watching eyes, the pressure of time running out, and the unexpected lightness that came from Ava's invitation. For the first time in 2 years, he found himself hoping for something beyond mere survival. As closing time approached, Ava packed up her things and approached the counter one more time. "Tomorrow night?" she asked. 7 o'clock? "Tomorrow night," he confirmed. She reached across the counter and touched his hand briefly, a gesture so simple it nearly undid him. "I'm looking forward to getting to know the real you, Elijah King." The way she said his name, like it mattered, like he mattered, made his chest tight with emotions he'd buried long ago. If only she knew how complicated the real him actually was. If only he could tell her the truth without losing her before he'd even had the chance to love her. As she left, the bell chiming her departure, Elijah wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life, or if maybe, just maybe, he was finally about to make the first truly right decision he'd made in years. 90 days to figure it out. 90 days to choose between duty and desire, between the legacy that had defined him and the love that might save him. The espresso machine hissed one last time as he began the closing routine, and somewhere in its steam and noise, Elijah King began to plan for the most important battle of his life. 3 weeks later, Elijah found himself in territory far more dangerous than any boardroom he'd ever navigated, Ava's cluttered art studio, watching her pace like a caged tiger while paint-stained canvases witnessed her desperation. 60 days, she muttered, running her hands through her curls. 60 days to come up with 3 months back rent, or I lose everything. She gestured wildly at the walls covered in her work, abstract pieces that somehow captured the soul of Atlanta's neighborhoods, portraits that revealed truths their subjects didn't even know they possessed. Elijah sat on her paint-splattered couch, his heart hammering against his ribs. The timing was impossible, perfect, terrifying. In his pocket, his phone had been buzzing all morning with messages from lawyers, accountants, and Julian's increasingly aggressive attempts to contact him. 57 days until his birthday. 57 days until he either claimed his inheritance or lost it forever. "There might be a solution," he said carefully. Ava stopped pacing and looked at him with desperate hope. "Please tell me you know someone who needs a kidney, because I'm about to start selling organs." "Nothing that drastic." Elijah stood, moving to study one of her paintings, a jazz musician lost in his music, captured in blues and golds that seemed to pulse with rhythm. "I've been looking into grants for community arts programs. There's one specifically for married couples who want to establish neighborhood cultural centers." "Married couples?" Ava's laugh was hollow. Well, that's useless then. It doesn't have to be. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge that might collapse at any moment. Ava turned slowly, her green eyes searching his face. Elijah, what are you saying? He took a deep breath, feeling like he was about to jump off a cliff. Marry me. The silence stretched so long that Elijah began to wonder if he'd actually spoken the words aloud. Then Ava sat down heavily on her painting stool, covering her face with her hands. This is crazy, she whispered through her fingers. We've been dating for barely a month. We've known each other for 4 months, Elijah corrected gently. And we've been friends for most of that time. Friends don't ask friends to marry them for grant money. Friends help friends when they're in trouble. He knelt beside her stool, taking her paint-stained hands in his. Ava, this could save your studio. You could expand, create the community center you've always talked about. She looked up at him, and he saw the exact moment she began to consider it seriously. What do you get out of this? The grant money would go to the arts program, not to you. If only she knew. If only he could tell her that he needed this marriage more than she could possibly understand, that his entire future hung in the balance of her answer. Instead, he said, I get to help someone I care about. I get to see you create something beautiful. A marriage of convenience, she said slowly. Like in those romance novels my mom used to read. Exactly like that. Elijah managed a smile. Except this is real life, so probably less dramatic. If she only knew how wrong she was about that. Ava stood and walked to her window, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. My parents will finish me. Your parents don't have to know it's not traditional. My parents think I should have married Bradley Morrison. Her voice was bitter. The trust fund baby they've been pushing on me since college. They already think I'm throwing my life away on art and poor life choices. Elijah's jaw tightened. He'd heard about Bradley Morrison, old Atlanta money, the kind of entitled wealth that thought it could buy anything, including people. What do you think? I think Bradley Morrison is a pompous ass who thinks women are decorative objects. She turned back to him, decision crystallizing in her eyes. I think this is the craziest thing I've ever considered. I think my family will disown me for marrying a waiter instead of a millionaire. Elijah flinched at the word waiter, guilt twisting in his stomach like a knife. But I also think, Ava continued, that you're the first person in years who's asked me what I want instead of telling me what I should want. So yes, Elijah King. I'll marry you. The relief that flooded through him was so intense he had to steady himself against her easel. Yes? Yes. She laughed, and it sounded like freedom. But we do this right. Legal paperwork, clear boundaries, honest communication about expectations. Of course. Honest communication. The irony wasn't lost on him. 2 hours later, they sat in a small law office downtown, signing papers that would bind them together in the eyes of the law. Elijah had insisted on a prenuptial agreement, for her protection, he'd said, though Ava had laughed at the idea that either of them had anything worth protecting. As they left the office, Ava slipped her hand into his. So, husband, where do we go from here? Wherever you want, Elijah said, meaning it despite the web of lies surrounding them. We figure it out together. What he didn't tell her was that his phone had been buzzing nonstop during the ceremony. Julian had somehow discovered the marriage clause and was already making moves. The game was no longer about inheritance, it was about survival. And now Ava was caught in the middle, an innocent artist who'd married a man she thought she knew, not knowing she'd just become the most valuable piece on a chessboard she didn't even know existed. The phone call came at 6:47 a.m., exactly 2 weeks after the wedding. Ava fumbled for her cell phone, still half asleep in the small apartment above the velvet note that she now shared with Elijah. Ava Marie Green, or should I say King now? Her mother's voice could have frozen hell. Care to explain why I had to learn about your marriage from the society pages? Ava sat up, instantly awake. Mom, do you have any idea what you've done? Bradley Morrison called your father last night. He's humiliated, Ava. His family is humiliated. And you married a waiter. The word waiter dripped with such disdain that Ava felt her temper flare. Elijah is a good man. A good man? Her mother's laugh was sharp as broken crystal. A good man doesn't steal away an heiress for her money. I'm not an heiress, and he didn't. Don't be naive. Men like that always have an angle. The line went quiet for a moment. Your father and I have made a decision. Until you come to your senses and end this ridiculous marriage, you are no longer welcome in this family. The dial tone echoed in the morning silence. Ava stared at the phone, feeling like she'd been slapped. Downstairs, she could hear Elijah moving around the cafe, preparing for the morning rush, blissfully unaware that her entire world had just shifted beneath her feet. Across town, Elijah's world was shifting too, though in ways far more dangerous than family disapproval. He stood in the marble lobby of Peachtree Tower, adjusting his tie, a piece of armor from his former life that felt foreign now. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like ascending to his own execution. Mr. King. Margaret Holbrook, his grandfather's longtime attorney, didn't rise from behind her mahogany desk. At 73, she had the kind of presence that could intimidate Supreme Court justices. You look different. 2 years of actual work will do that to a person. Indeed. She opened a thick folder. Your cousin has been busy. Julian's filed formal papers questioning your mental competency, citing your abandonment of family responsibilities and what he calls erratic behavior patterns. Elijah's blood ran cold. On what grounds? Your marriage, primarily. He's claiming it's a sham designed to circumvent the will's requirements. Margaret's steel-gray eyes studied him. Is it? The question hung in the air like smoke. Elijah thought of Ava that morning, her hair a wild halo on the pillow, the way she'd reached for him in her sleep. Whatever their marriage had started as, it was becoming something real. No, he said finally. It's not a sham. Good. Because Julian's hired investigators. They're digging into your wife's background, her finances, her family connections. Be very careful, Elijah. Julian doesn't just want your inheritance, he wants to destroy you. As if summoned by their conversation, Elijah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Coffee? I think it's time we talked. BM. Bradley Morrison. The trust fund prince who'd expected to marry Ava, now suddenly interested in conversation. Elijah's instincts, honed by years in corporate warfare, screamed danger. He met Bradley at an upscale coffee shop in Buckhead, the kind of place where a single cup cost more than most people made in an hour. Bradley sat like he owned the world, his blonde hair perfectly styled, his smile sharp as a blade. So you're the man who stole my fiancée, Bradley said without preamble. She was never your fiancée. Wasn't she? Bradley's laugh was cold. Her parents had already agreed. The engagement announcement was written. All that remained was the formality of asking her. Maybe you should have asked her what she wanted. Oh, I know exactly what Ava wants. The question is, do you? Bradley leaned forward, his blue eyes glittering with malice. Because I know who you really are, Elijah King. Son of Richard King, heir to King Media Corporation. The question is, does she? The coffee cup trembled slightly in Elijah's hand. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Bradley's smile widened. Just like you don't know about the inheritance clause that requires you to be married by your 30th birthday. Just like you don't know that your cousin Julian is the one who told me exactly where to find you. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Julian hadn't just discovered the marriage clause, he was actively working to destroy Elijah's relationships, to isolate him, to prove he was unfit for the inheritance. What do you want? Elijah asked quietly. Simple. You disappear from Ava's life, and I don't tell her the truth about why you really married her. She gets to keep her illusions about love conquering all, and I get what was always meant to be mine. And if I refuse? Bradley's smile turned predatory. Then she learns that her husband is a liar who married her for money. Think she'll still love you when she realizes you're worth more than her entire family? When she discovers you've been playing the poor, noble waiter while sitting on $1 billion fortune? After Bradley left, Elijah sat alone in the coffee shop, staring at his reflection in the window. Outside, Atlanta moved with its usual rhythm, but inside his chest, everything was falling apart. He'd thought he could protect Ava from his world, could keep her safe in their small bubble of happiness. Instead, he'd painted a target on her back. His phone rang. Ava's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, he considered not answering. How could he tell her that her family had disowned her? How could he explain that his very presence in her life was putting her in danger? "Hey," he answered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Elijah?" Ava's voice was small, broken. "Can you come home? Something's happened." As he rushed back to their apartment, Elijah realized that the careful walls he'd built around his two lives were crumbling. Soon, everyone would know the truth about who he really was. The only question was whether there would be anything left to save when the dust settled. When Elijah arrived at their apartment, he found Ava sitting on the floor surrounded by torn papers, her face streaked with tears. In her hands was an envelope with the King Media Corporation logo, elegant, gold-embossed, damning. "What is this?" she whispered, holding up the emergency board meeting notice. "Why is your name on King Media letterhead as a primary shareholder?" Elijah's world tilted on its axis. The carefully constructed walls between his two lives hadn't just crumbled, they'd been demolished with surgical precision. "Ava, I can explain." "Can you?" She stood, the papers scattering around her feet like autumn leaves. "Because according to this document, Elijah King isn't just some waiter I fell in love with. He's the heir to a billion-dollar empire who's been lying to me for months. I never lied about my feelings for you. But you lied about everything else." Her voice cracked with pain. "Was any of it real? The cafe, the struggling artist's story, the marriage for the grant money?" Before Elijah could answer, his phone rang. Margaret Holbrook's name flashed on the screen. "Don't answer it," Ava said, but he was already reaching for the phone. "Julian's called an emergency board meeting." Margaret's voice was grim. "Tonight, 7 p.m. He's claiming you married this woman under false pretenses to satisfy the inheritance clause. He has Bradley Morrison ready to testify that your wife was manipulated and that the marriage is fraudulent." Elijah closed his eyes. How did he get the board to agree to an emergency session? He's alleging immediate financial harm to the company. Apparently, he has evidence of your so-called deception. Margaret paused. "Elijah, he's going for a complete takeover. If he succeeds tonight, you won't just lose your inheritance, you'll be barred from any involvement with King Media forever. I'll be there." "No," Ava said when he hung up. "We'll be there." Elijah stared at her. "Ava, you don't understand how dangerous this is. I understand that I married a man who's been lying to me for months. I understand that somehow I've become a pawn in some rich family's power game." Her green eyes blazed with fury and hurt. "What I don't understand is why you didn't trust me with the truth." 3 hours later, they sat in the King Media boardroom on the 52nd floor of downtown Atlanta's most prestigious building. The view was spectacular, the city spread out like jewels against black velvet, but the atmosphere was poisonous. Julian sat at the head of the polished mahogany table like a king holding court. 12 board members, mostly men in expensive suits who'd watched Elijah grow up, now looked at him with expressions ranging from disappointment to outright hostility. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian began, his voice smooth as silk, "we're here because my cousin has made a mockery of our grandfather's final wishes. The marriage clause in the will was designed to ensure the next generation's commitment to family values and stability. Instead, Elijah has entered into a fraudulent marriage with a woman he barely knows, purely to claim an inheritance he abandoned years ago." Bradley Morrison sat beside Julian like a perfect golden prince, radiating smugness. "I can testify that Miss Green, excuse me, Mrs. King, was completely unaware of her husband's true identity when she agreed to marry him. She believed she was marrying a struggling waiter, not a billionaire heir." "That's enough," Ava said quietly, but her voice carried across the room like a bell. Every head turned toward her. Julian's smile faltered slightly as he took in her paint-stained dress, her defiant posture, the way she looked like she belonged in this room despite everything. "Mrs. King," Julian said condescendingly, "this is a private corporate matter. This is about my marriage," Ava interrupted, standing. "Which makes it very much my business." She looked around the room, meeting each board member's eyes. "You want to know if my marriage is real? You want to know if I was manipulated?" She pulled out a folder from her bag, one Elijah hadn't seen before. "This morning, after I learned the truth about my husband's identity, I went to see Margaret Holbrook. I wanted to understand what I'd gotten myself into." Ava's voice grew stronger with each word. "Imagine my surprise when I discovered that 3 days after our wedding, Elijah had already filed paperwork transferring 60% of his inheritance into a community arts foundation. In my name." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Elijah stared at Ava, stunned. He'd filed those papers in secret, wanting to protect his gift to the community from Julian's potential retaliation. He never told anyone, not even Margaret. He didn't do it to satisfy some clause. Ava continued, her voice ringing with conviction. He did it because he knew that if something happened to him, if Julian succeeded in taking everything, at least the foundation would survive. He protected something he knew I cared about before he ever told me who he really was. Julian's face had gone pale. "That's impossible. The inheritance can't be transferred until the heir formally accepts it, which happens automatically upon marriage," Margaret interrupted smoothly. "A fact you apparently overlooked in your research, Julian." Board member Harrison Williams, Elijah's grandfather's oldest friend, leaned forward. "Let me understand this correctly. Elijah has already donated the majority of his inheritance to charity." "Not donated," Ava corrected. "Entrusted. To ensure that King Media's profits would benefit the communities where the company operates, not just shareholders." "That sounds," Williams said slowly, "exactly like something Robert King would have done." Julian shot to his feet. "This is manipulation. She's obviously coached." "By whom?" Ava's laugh was sharp. "I learned about this foundation the same time you did. 3 hours ago." She looked directly at Elijah, and for the first time since he'd arrived home, her expression softened slightly. "The only manipulation here is a man who loved his community more than his bank account, and was too humble to tell his wife that he just made her one of the most powerful philanthropists in Georgia." The board voted unanimously to dismiss Julian's challenge. More than that, they voted to officially recognize Elijah as CEO, effective immediately. But as they left the building, Ava walked 3 steps ahead of him, her shoulders rigid with hurt and anger. "Ava, please." She stopped at the elevator, turning to face him with tears in her eyes. "You made me into something I never asked to be. You gave me power I never wanted. And you did it all without asking me what I thought." The elevator doors closed between them like a guillotine, leaving Elijah alone with his victory and the growing certainty that he'd won everything except the only thing that mattered. The CEO office on the 55th floor of King Media Tower felt like a mausoleum. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Atlanta, but Elijah sat with his back to the city, staring at the oil painting of his grandfather that dominated the far wall. Robert King's eyes seemed to judge him from beyond the grave. 3 days. 3 days since the board meeting, and Ava hadn't returned a single call. "Mr. King?" His new assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The morning staff meeting is ready to begin." Elijah straightened his tie, silk now, not the simple cotton he'd worn at the Velvet Note. Everything about him had changed overnight. The tailored suits, the corner office, the deference in people's voices when they spoke to him. He was exactly who he'd been born to be, and he never felt more lost. The staff meeting was a blur of quarterly reports and market projections. Elijah nodded at appropriate moments, signed documents that would affect thousands of jobs, made decisions worth millions of dollars. But his mind was across town, in a paint-splattered studio where his wife was probably planning her escape from the life he'd thrust upon her. After the meeting, Margaret Holbrook appeared in his doorway like a specter from his past. "Congratulations, Mr. CEO," she said, but there was no warmth in her voice. You have everything your grandfather wanted you to have. Do I? Elijah gestured at the opulent office. Because it feels like I've lost everything that actually mattered. Perhaps that's because you're thinking like your father instead of your grandfather. Margaret moved to the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. Robert King didn't build this company for profit. He built it to give voice to the voiceless, to tell stories that needed telling. The money was just a tool. And what am I supposed to do with that wisdom? Ava won't even speak to me. Have you tried speaking to her? Before Elijah could answer, his phone buzzed. A news alert from one of their competitor networks. King Media heiress abandons fortune. Ava King spotted moving out of luxury apartment. His blood turned to ice. Ava was leaving. Not just him, everything. 20 minutes later, Elijah stood outside Ava's studio, watching through the window as she packed her paintings into boxes. She moved with mechanical precision, each canvas wrapped and stored like she was erasing their shared history one piece at a time. The bell chimed as he entered, and she looked up with red-rimmed eyes. Come to check on your investment? She asked bitterly. Come to check on my wife. Your wife? Ava laughed, but it sounded broken. I don't even know who that is anymore. Am I the struggling artist you fell in love with, or am I the foundation director you created without asking? Am I Ava Green who married for love, or Ava King who married into obligation? Elijah stepped closer, his heart breaking at the pain in her voice. You're the woman who stood up in that boardroom and defended a man who'd lied to her. You're the person who saw through Julian's manipulation in minutes while I spent years running from it. Don't. She held up a paint-stained hand. Don't make this about heroics. I defended you because what Julian was doing was wrong, not because I forgave you. Then what would it take? For you to forgive me? Ava was quiet for so long that Elijah thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I fell in love with a man who pulled espresso shots and talked about jazz like it was religion. A man who listened to my dreams and made me feel like they mattered. You took that man away from me and replaced him with a stranger in an expensive suit. I'm still the same person. Are you? She gestured around the studio. Because the man I married would never have made decisions about my life without asking me. He would never have put me in a position where I had to choose between love and authenticity. Elijah felt something crack inside his chest. What are you saying? I'm saying that I need time to figure out who I am when I'm not someone's project or someone's escape plan. Ava picked up a canvas, the painting she'd been working on the day they met, a jazz musician lost in his music. I'm saying that maybe we both need to figure out who we are separately before we can figure out who we are together. And the foundation? Will do amazing things for this community, with or without me running it. She met his eyes, and he saw steel beneath the sadness. Find someone who wants that responsibility, Elijah. Someone who chose it. That afternoon, Elijah called a press conference. Standing behind the podium in King Media's main conference room, facing cameras and reporters who'd covered his family for decades, he made the announcement that would shock corporate Atlanta. Effective immediately, I'm resigning as CEO of King Media Corporation, he said, ignoring the gasps and camera flashes. Furthermore, I'm naming Ava King as the permanent chair of the King Community Foundation, with full autonomy to direct its mission and resources. The questions came like bullets. Why was he stepping down? What were his plans? Was this related to his marriage? Elijah answered what he could and deflected what he couldn't, but his final statement was the only one that mattered. 2 years ago, I walked away from this company because I thought money and power corrupted everything they touched. I was wrong. It's not wealth that corrupts, it's the inability to remember why you wanted it in the first place. He looked directly into the camera, hoping somehow Ava was watching. My grandfather built King Media to tell important stories. Today, I'm telling mine. Love isn't about having power over someone's life. It's about having the courage to let them choose their own. As Elijah left the podium, he felt lighter than he had in years. He'd given up everything his family expected him to want, and for the first time since his grandfather's death, He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, even if it meant being there alone. 1 year later, the October sun painted Atlanta in shades of amber and gold as Ava stood before the glass doors of the Velvet Community Arts Center. The converted warehouse in the old Fourth Ward hummed with creative energy, children's laughter from the after-school program, the distant sound of jazz from the practice rooms, the quiet concentration of artists at work in the studios upstairs. She'd built something beautiful here. Something real. The plaque beside the entrance read, Velvet Community Arts Center, founded by the King Community Foundation, where every voice finds its stage. She'd argued against including the foundation's name, but the board had insisted. It was honest advertising, they'd said. People deserved to know where their opportunities came from. Miss Ava, look what I painted! 7-year-old Marcus Jr., named after the waiter who'd become the center's first art instructor, rushed up with a canvas covered in bold strokes of blue and purple. It's a jazz musician, just like in your painting upstairs. Ava smiled, kneeling to examine his work seriously. I love how you made the music visible. See how your brushstrokes move like the rhythm? As Marcus Jr. beamed and ran back to his class, Ava's eyes drifted to the corner of the main gallery. There, exactly where she'd placed it a year ago, sat a single velvet chair. Deep burgundy, slightly worn, comfortable enough for long conversations. It had been a gift from the center's opening day, along with a note that simply said, For whenever you need to remember that someone believes in your dreams. The chair had remained empty for 365 days. She told herself she kept it for practical reasons, extra seating for events, a place for tired parents to rest during children's classes. But late at night, when she worked alone in her upstairs studio, she sometimes caught herself glancing down at it, wondering if today would be the day she'd find it occupied. Excuse me? A voice from behind made her turn. I was wondering if you had any openings in your evening painting classes? Ava's heart stopped. Elijah stood in the doorway, but not the Elijah she'd known in either of his previous incarnations. Gone were both the waiter's uniform and the CEO's armor. Instead, he wore simple jeans and a paint-stained Henley, his hair slightly longer, his eyes brighter than she'd seen them since those early days at the Velvet Note. In his hands he carried 2 cups of coffee and a small wrapped canvas. Depends, she managed, her voice steadier than her racing pulse. What's your experience level? Beginner, he said, stepping into the gallery like he was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. I've been taking classes at a little studio in Decatur. Turns out I'm terrible at landscapes but not bad with portraits. He held up the wrapped canvas. Mind if I show you? With trembling fingers, Ava unwrapped the painting. It was her, captured in oils and honesty, not idealized or romanticized, but real. She was in her element, surrounded by children's artwork, her hair escaping its ponytail, paint smudged on her cheek. But it was her eyes that took her breath away. In Elijah's painting, she looked exactly the way she felt in this place, alive, purposeful, home. When did you? Last month. I came to the community open house. His smile was tentative, hopeful. I stayed in the back, watched you teach those kids about color theory. You were radiant. You were here? Why didn't you? Because I promised myself I wouldn't approach you until I figured out who I was when I wasn't running towards something or away from it. He gestured around the gallery, taking in the walls covered with community art, the buzz of creative activity. Took me a while to realize I'd been looking in the wrong places. Ava set the painting carefully on a nearby easel, her hands shaking. And who are you now? Someone who pulls espresso shots at a little cafe in Virginia Highland 3 days a week, he said, and she couldn't help but smile at the surprise in her voice. Someone who's learning that honest work feels better than inherited power. Someone who discovered he likes teaching business classes to artists who want to make their passion sustainable. And the foundation? Has an excellent board of directors who didn't need a meddling ex-CEO telling them how to do their jobs. His eyes met hers, serious now. Ava, I'm not here to claim anything or fix anything or convince you of anything. I'm here because a year ago, you told me to figure out who I am separately before we could figure out who we are together. And I think I've figured out who I am. I'm someone who believes jazz is religion, who thinks your dreams are the most important things in any room, and who loves you enough to spend a year learning how to deserve a second chance. Ava looked at the velvet chair, then back at Elijah. For the first time in a year, she could breathe fully. The evening painting class meets Tuesdays and Thursdays, she said quietly. 7 to 9. We're working on a community mural project. Sounds perfect. As if on cue, the afternoon jazz ensemble began practicing in the next room, their music spilling into the gallery like a promise. Elijah moved toward the velvet chair, then paused. May I? Ava nodded, not trusting her voice. As he settled into the chair that had waited for him, coffee cooling in his hands, she realized that some things were worth the wait. Some love stories needed time to find their true ending. And sometimes, the best part of falling in love was learning how to choose it again, with eyes wide open and hearts that had learned the difference between being rescued and being cherished. So, Elijah said, his smile the same one that had first captured her attention in a little jazz cafe. Tell me about this mural. This time, when she began to speak, there were no secrets between them. Only truth, possibility, and the kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars or inherited through wills. Only love, freely given and gratefully received. The kind of fortune that made them both truly rich.